Hello all and welcome. Whether you're returning or joining us for the first time, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me on my channel. My name is Jess, better known by the author moniker Jelim, and I'm the author of the Monster Inside Chronicles, the first vampire series. Last week I started this channel with my very first author Q&A. Thank you so much to those who sent in their questions and showed their support. For those that haven't seen it, I'll link the video up the top of the screen for you to check out. Now this week I thought I'd start something a little different. I've designed this channel to be a way to connect with fans of my work and better explore the worlds that I've created, but most, if not all of you, have only ever read the first vampire books that I've made public on Webnovel and Royal Road. The truth is, I've been writing a lot longer than just the past couple of years, and not every idea makes it out of my books folder on my laptop. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to do a series called Storytime, where I look back at previous works and read you a little bit of that. For the first installment, I thought I'd start with my very first story I ever sat down to write. I'll give you a bit of background first though. The reason that I started writing happened back in 2009. There was a terrible event in the area where I lived that came to be known as Black Saturday, and it was basically a terrible bushfire that lasted for several days, and my family was affected in the sense that our house was burned down. So that was my childhood home. I'd spent the first 12 years of my life there, and it was really devastating to lose it. In the months that followed, my family had to move into a rental, and keep in mind that this was probably a week after I started high school was when this happened, so it was already a big part of my life that was changing, and then something terrible like losing basically everything you owned and where you lived had happened to me on top of that. So my family moved into a rental home about 3 weeks afterwards. In the interim, we were staying on the second floor of a friend's house, and we will be grateful until probably the end of our lives for the hospitality that they showed us during that time, and the help that we got from a lot of people during that time. But regardless of the help that was given, it is still a difficult time when you have to accept that help, especially when you've never needed that help before and you don't feel like you deserve that help despite the fact that you've lost so much. But you just need to accept it, because it's not just yourself who is feeling terrible and feeling guilty, and the reason people offer these things a lot of the time is because they too are feeling that guilt, and they too are feeling terrible about what's happened, and they want to help. So it's really hard, but yeah, you just have got to accept it. In the year or so that followed, we were in the rental house, and we all decided very quickly that we hated it. Me and my brother had grown up outside of town, living on a decent block of land, and my parents had lived there for as long as we had. My dad had built the house that we had lived in and had burned down, and so we all loved living in the country and on decent blocks of land, and we hated being squashed together on a tiny block of land where we could hear our neighbours flush the toilet, essentially. So we decided very quickly that we wanted to go back to the bush, and we ended up building a house in an area close to where we had lived before, on another block of land. The building started probably the beginning of the following year, so probably about March, April of 2010. And we finally moved in October of 2010. But because we hated the rental house so much, we decided that because we owned the block of land that was being built on, we would just move out there and live in the massive shed that had been built there, along with a couple of caravans. So we did that for 6 months, and we were all a lot happier living out there than we were at a rental house in town. So that's a bit of background of what was going on in my life at the time that I started writing. And probably the main reason that I started writing is because I needed a coping mechanism for what was happening in my life. I couldn't control a lot of the things that were happening. It was a really difficult time for me, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I decided that I would escape. And when my books couldn't give me that, I decided to control my own world and to make my own world where I could exercise that control and I could make something there. I could imagine whatever I wanted to imagine. And the story that came about because of that mindset and a few of the inspirations that I'd got during the time was a book called Phoenix, which was my very first story that I wrote when I was about 12 or 13. So I'll go ahead and read the prologue and the first chapter of that story for you now. Keep in mind that I have not opened this or edited it for 7 years at least, and it was originally written when I was 12, so you can expect plenty of mistakes in there. Hopefully you can enjoy this story that I've created. Let's go ahead. Prologue. Element was once a peaceful planet, one where everyone trusted one another and where kids were always generous. Everyone had equal rights and children were never bullied. A man named Almado was once chosen to lead a great voyage to a place known as the Center Stone, and was top secret, so nobody knew about it. However, the ship mysteriously disappeared in the middle of the ocean, and nobody was ever recovered. But Almaldor survived the crash, and waited 10 long years to be rescued, but it never came. Seeing the anger in him, the spirit of darkness visited Almaldor and gave him a gift more powerful than anything anyone could ever have imagined. Almaldor became the god of darkness. Guardians of the Phoenix, Serene, Carnot, and Ignatus, became aware of Almaldor's title, but did not dare share it with anyone for fear the goodness in Element would be driven to extinction. So instead, they devised a plan that would play against Almaldor's forces of evil. But Almaldor's power was too strong. He forced world leaders to fight against themselves, then he destroyed them all and named himself King of Element without hesitation. 10 years after, Almaldor began his own rule. The Guardians had seen enough. They created a team of 4 people that fought for freedom. Flint, Wisp, Alon, and Ito were the 4 people that became known as the Phoenix as they fought against Almaldor for freedom. As the belief of freedom spread, many more groups formed, creating an army of freedom fighters. Hope for all creatures formed, and Almaldor, seeing the light in amongst all the darkness, decided to end it once and for all. When the Guardians of the Phoenix heard that Almaldor had announced war on the Phoenix and the freedom fighters, they summoned the spirits of earth, air, water, and fire so that the Phoenix team may have a chance of winning. But the spirits did not give a gift as strong as the dark spirit had given Almaldor. They gave the Phoenix team the title of Lord instead of God, and after many months of fighting against Almaldor with the freedom fighters, Flint, Wisp, Alon, and Ito were defeated and died along with any chance of defeating Almaldor, until now. After the Guardians had predicted that Almaldor would rule for another 70 years without trouble, they formed a prophecy intertwining the fates of the descendants of the original Phoenix. And so the world forgot about the Phoenix, who became hopeless bedtime stories for children and a never-ending loss for Element. Chapter 1. Capture. It made sense to Flint. He didn't care how silly the idea of it was, but he knew it was the only way to end the madness that surrounded him. Almaldor didn't really care for his people. He just enjoyed the power and how great ruling over terrified people was. Flint had been in the presence of Almaldor quite a few times before, but he knew there was something different about Almaldor, something different than anything else in all of Element. Almaldor's eyes were always black with hatred, and his voice boomed with power. He didn't sound like any ordinary man. Flint slid his hands into his pockets and put his hood over his spiky blonde hair. He walked along a dark alley, kicking a can as he went and watching it with his orange eyes. A black army ship passed overhead and landed somewhere in the middle of town. Flint needed to find somewhere to hide. Before long, soldiers would be searching the town for kids that were of age. He ducked into the back room of a cafe and walked along through the storage room to the hallway. "What are you doing here, kid?" asked a gruff voice behind Flint. Flint turned to see a large man with a meat knife around his waist and what used to be a white apron on. He smelled of fresh meat, and Flint knew he was a butcher. "I'm looking for the bathroom," said Flint. "Do you mind telling me where to go?" The man stared at Flint for a long time, trying to decide whether he was telling the truth or not. "Down the hallway, first door on your left when you're round the corner," said the man. "Thank you, sir," said Flint. He followed the man's directions and found himself in the main dining area of the cafe. Great, thought Flint. It's either I've gone too far or that guy didn't trust me. Flint sighed and sat down at a corner table by himself. There was a heap of teenagers in there, enjoying the Friday night. The cafe was set out in a U shape with the tables all around the outside of the counter and display windows in the middle. The wall was painted a dark blue and an old chandelier hung from the ceiling. There were 2 doors, one on the far side of the cafe and one opposite the counter. Flint looked around at the kids. Most were young kids, maybe 14, 15, but there were a couple of groups with teenagers around Flint's age. Flint sighed and stared out the window, waiting for the soldiers to round the corner and come to the cafe. He knew he would be recognised. The last time he got caught, he had made an escape to remember, blowing up the hangar bay of Almaldor's castle. It had been fun, he had to admit. Flint looked back to where he had been at the orphanage, and when the matron would sing to him before he fell asleep at night. Darkness has ruled so long, the time has come to end it. In the time of war comes great distress, as heroes fight for freedom. We watch as the Phoenix come, to even our hope and weaken our cries. Phoenix, 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 Phoenix. For they will defeat the dark and bring light once more to Element. They fall to their earthly graves as darkness regains its strength, but one day the heroes will come and fight once more for freedom. The voice echoed in Flint's head as the door opposite the counter smashed open. A man in black holding a laser shooter steps through it. He is followed by others also holding guns and wearing black outfits, but the one in front is obviously the leader as he gives orders to the others. Flint looks up and hopes that nobody notices him. There was no way out of the booth he was sitting in without somebody noticing. The leader looks around with dark eyes like his master's. He points to a boy sitting on the other side of the cafe. The boy has spiky hair like Flint's, but it's a light brown, and his eyes are blue like the ocean. "How old are you, boy?" asked the leader. "I'm 17, sir," said the boy. "A good age, boy. Do you know why it's a good age?" asked the leader. The boy stood still. He didn't seem afraid, but he knew not to say anything stupid, so he kept quiet. "It's a good age, boy, because it's an age where you can begin serving Almaldor." The leader nodded towards the boy, and a soldier went and grabbed him by the arm before dragging him out of the cafe. The leader nodded to another strong-looking boy with short black hair and light brown eyes sitting with his friends. "You'll make a fine addition too." Some soldiers grabbed hold of the boy and dragged him outside to wait as well. Then the leader did one thing that Flint had seen so many times before and couldn't stand. He walked over to a group of girls and picked the prettiest one out before giving her to a soldier. "Leave me alone," shouted the girl as she was dragged out of the room, her flaming red hair flowing after her. The leader's eyes turned to the side of the cafe Flint was sitting on now, and he scanned until his eyes rested on Flint. "Well, well, well, Flint Russo, have enough courage to show your face in public, do we?" asked the leader. "I don't need courage to do that, Carlton," Flint snapped. "You make it look like the circus has come to town." "I wouldn't say that, Flint, because you just earned a night in the dungeons," said Carlton. "This time I'll make sure there's a guard at your cell." Carlton snapped his finger and pointed at me, then walked out of the door of the cafe. Flint was cuffed and then violently shoved out the door of the cafe onto the streets. Flint watched as doors were crushed down and young boys around his age were thrown out of them by soldiers of the Black Army. Recruiting was what Armador called it, but most who despised him called it the Thiever of Lives, and now the kids understood why. All the recruits were taken by the soldiers to the centre square and shoved aboard the Black Army ship that waited for them. The ship had a lovely design, but it was painted black and was evil like Armador himself. A man with a pad of paper and a pen stood at the top of the ramp up to the ship. He smiled at Flint as he walked up to the ramp. "Back again, are we, Flint?" asked the man. "I'm sick of writing your name down." "We have 2 other recruits. Say our names to Mr. Polite, you two," said Carlton. "Will Talon," said the boy with the spiky brown hair. The man wrote the name down on the pad and looked up at the muscular guy Carlton had ordered his men to take. "Eat Drayle," said the boy. "And the girl too, Carlton?" asked Mr. Polite. "She'll be a maid," said Carlton. Mr. Polite nodded and stood aside for the group to walk through. The boy walked through the dark halls of the ship until they came to a small room which they were shoved in. "Hope this is comfortable enough for you. Enjoy the ride," said Carlton. His men laughed as he slammed the door shut before anyone could object to the state of the room. "Disgusting," said the girl who was lifting her hand off the dirty floor. "What, did you expect it to be clean?" asked the boy with the spiky brown hair, Will. "Well, no, but I expected it to be better than this," the girl said. "I'm Alice, by the way." "Will," replied the boy. "I'm Eatus," said the boy with the short black hair. "What about you? What's your name?" Flint turned and looked at the others occupying the small room. "Flint," he said. "Have you been in trouble with the Black Army before?" asked Eatus. "Yeah, this is the 8th time in the last 7 months. Armador sometimes wonders how I escape. Last time I kind of made it obvious, though," replied Flint. "Why? What did you do?" asked Alice. "I blew up the castle's hangar bay. Good fun that was," said Flint. "I was told it was impossible to escape Armador's castle," said Alice. "It's supposed to be, but I'm proof that you can get out of there, aren't I? Only problem is, I don't really get out knowingly." "I just get out," said Flint. "I go to a different town after every trial, and I haven't seen my parents for a year now. I was supposed to go back to them 8 months ago, but I couldn't afford a ticket back to them. After that, I got arrested." "Well, that's reassuring. I'm sure we'll get out now, and I won't become a stupid maid for that stuck-up guy who calls himself a king," said Alice. "Oi, do not insult our great king, maid," snapped the guard. "I bet you were paid to say that," Alice snapped back. "I bet he was. Nobody likes Armador these days," said Will. "My parents will be worried sick," said Eatus. "Having a son as strong as you, somehow I doubt it," said Will. "They worry over everything. They think it's a good thing for me to be back by a curfew for my little brother," said Eatus. "I have a little brother too. If we don't get out of this, I don't know what I'd do if he ended up in the Black Army," said Alice. "My brother is like most brothers, annoying in a lovable way," said Will. "I'll still miss him, though. What about you, Flint? You have any siblings?" asked Eatus. "I wouldn't know," thought Flint. "I was in an orphanage until I was 5 when I ran away." "Nope, I'm an only child," said Flint. "Lucky, you get all the attention," said Will. "Not really, my parents have their own things to do," said Flint. "So they wouldn't even be worrying about you now?" asked Alice. "They'd probably be worrying, just not able to do anything about it," said Flint. For the rest of the trip the kids were silent. When they came to the dark castle, you could spot the thing from miles away. It was the most obvious thing in the landscape. Everything was dead, dark, and covered in mist. When the ship landed on one of the newly built platforms, seeing as Flint had destroyed the last ones, the kids were taken from the room and into the castle, then down to the dungeons where they were shoved into a cell for the night. "Have a good night," said Carlton as he marched off down the dark corridor through which they had come. Well guys, that was the end of our very first story time, looking back on the first story that I ever wrote when I was 12 years old, and the whole time I was reading that I kept flinching at grammatical and spelling errors and rolling my eyes at when I changed between first and third person point of view. But I guess it just goes to show that you can start from anywhere, and if you want to write and it's something that you want to do, if you keep at it and keep refining and practicing and just keep going really, and you can turn up anywhere. So I hope that has been interesting for you guys. If you've got any other requests on what you think I should read for story time, I would be glad to hear it. I hope you all have been doing well and that you continue to do well. Thank you for joining me today. If you're interested, I'd be really grateful for any subscriptions, comments or likes that you can give this video or my Q&A video that I've done previously. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.